Today is All Saints Sunday, when we celebrate the holy people of our faith. Some saints are famous, like Francis of Assisi. Most of them are less well-known people who toiled trying to live out God's will in their time and place. This morning, I would like to hold up two lesser-known saints who are remembered in our Episcopal Church calendar, and see if they might say something to us today. If the Episcopal Church had a George Washington figure, it would be this first man. And this is actually particularly apt because George and Martha Washington were actually members of his congregation where he was the rector. The man's name was William White, and he was rector of Christ Church in Philadelphia and later became the Bishop of Pennsylvania. If you know your American history, there was a lot going on in Philadelphia in the 1700s, and William White was right in the middle of it. He was chaplain to the Continental Congress and later the first chaplain to the American Senate. He was somebody who offered prayers and spiritual guidance to those people who were founding our nation. Back then, there was actually a lot of conflict in the Anglican Church in America, particularly among the clergy, because most of the clergy here in America backed England and not the colonists in the American Revolution. Why did they do that? Well, basically, the King of England paid their salary, so they backed England. Well, there were a few other clergy, like William White, who took the risk to stand with the colonists during the American Revolution. It might have helped that people in his congregation were people like Betsy Ross and Benjamin Franklin. After the Revolutionary War, William White was chosen as the first presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church to give some direction and guidance to our newly formed denomination. William White actually would have known our congregation very well. There was actually a convention here in 1808, and we know that William White was here, not in this building, but in this location, and that we know he was also in our rectory up across the street. He knew our congregation. That's fun. William White was instrumental in creating some of the structures in the Episcopal Church that we continue to enjoy today. For example, it was White who proposed the innovation, and it really was an innovation, to get lay people more involved in the church's key decision-making bodies. Most of the people here in our congregation today, actually everybody but me, is a layperson. William White wanted lay people to know this is not going to be a top-down church with the ordained people at the top telling everyone what to do. No, we're going to have a different kind of church where lay people have a voice and vote. That is you. This is your church, he wanted to say. White's vision has given really a direction to our denomination ever since. And you can kind of think now back to those founding fathers and their vision of democracy. They didn't want the leadership of a king telling what everyone to do on top. White had that same sort of vision for the Episcopal Church based on the involvement of all people. The institutional church is having its struggles today, sure. In American politics, well, there is a lot that is dysfunctional and problematic. we can hold up William White. He really tried to work on the institutions, both of the church and the government, to make them better, to involve more people. And so for us to think about our part to play, you and I, starting with voting in political elections, but also being engaged in the direction of our parish. It's your church. We have plenty of uphill battles, but we can't wait for someone else to solve the problems. White shows us there's no time to be cynical, to back away and let others do it. Each person's involvement in the civic and congregational life of their communities is so important. The other saint I want to hold up today is more well known, but not as much in the religious sphere. Her name is Florence Nightingale, and her day in our Episcopal Church calendar is August 12th. And we probably know the name Florence Nightingale connected with nursing, right? I mean, you even could hear people say, someone caring for the sick, you say, boy, they're a Florence Nightingale. Well, Florence, as she grew up in England in the 1800s, she was actually prevented from becoming a nurse by her wealthy family because back then, nursing was considered too much of a low-class profession. But when Florence was 16, she'd had this spiritual experience. She felt called to serve. She actually felt called by God to serve. And in this service, she had a sense, I think I'm supposed to become a nurse. She turned to her faith for strength and direction. She was a devout Anglican who felt this loving God was close to her and supporting her. And she would write things like, quote, I don't think any words have had a fuller possession of my mind than Christ putting himself in the place of the sick, the infirm, the prisoner, telling us that we can see Christ in them because it is so true. Florence Nightingale was inspired by this sense of the presence of Christ in sick and hurting people in the world. Florence Nightingale finally had her chance to live into her nursing call in the war in Crimea. And one of the great advances that she did was high standards of sanitation and cleanliness. This drastically reduced the infections and the death toll. Her commitment to visiting patients through the night gave her the nickname, the Lady with the Lamp. Can we imagine Florence Nightingale going from tent to tent, stepping through the darkness to care for people who were sick and suffering? What an inspirational image of care. Florence Nightingale drastically improved nursing by medical care, but actually she did a lot of less flashy grunt work. Some of her greatest advances were in administrative reform and even statistics. One of the reasons to hold up a person like Florence Nightingale on an All Saints Sunday is that she wasn't a bishop or a martyr or a monk. She had a real-world job that happened to be in the medical field. Many people here in our congregation this morning work in healthcare. And some of us here might work with numbers and graphs, statistics and administration, or maybe some other unglamorous task. But we can all use our talents to try to make the world a better place. It can be helpful to actually expand our notion of ministry and even spiritual gifts on a day like All Saints Sunday. So I have no doubt in my mind that God wants to use every person in this congregation. God does. Yes, you and me, God's holy and perfect people. And so it can help if we can shift our thinking just a little bit. That saints are not just from some faraway times doing impossibly virtuous things, thinking, oh, they can't be around today, or they're not like you and me. We just sang a hymn about saints that listed just some of the ways we can encounter holy people today. I love this English hymn because it even goes on to mention finding them at tea. So I ask you to turn to page 4 in your leaflet. Get your leaflet and turn to page 4. The song, it's a sing-a-song of the saints of God. Look with me at verse 3 and see if we can apply these words to ourselves on this All Saints Sunday. They live not only in ages past, there are hundreds and thousands still. The world is bright with the joyous saints who love to do Jesus' will. You can meet them in school, or in lanes, or at sea, in church, or in trains, or in shops, or at tea. For the saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one too.